When most people think of Lord of the Flies, I think the first character that comes to mind is probably Piggy. And if not Piggy, then Ralph or Jack. But there's one character that I think is probably the most important character in the book, and he's not talked about that much, and he's also probably the quietest one of the four, but his name's Simon. Simon is the most important character in this book for a number of reasons. In this video, I want to talk about why that is. I want to read some passages from the actual text and, just get into him as a character, what makes him tick, and why he was most likely Golding's favorite character to write. So, to begin with, as we know, all the characters in this book are really complex. And what makes a complex character? Well, a complex character is a character that has conflicting motivations. Or another way to look at it is there are two things about that character that sort of oppose themselves. Contradictions, that's another way to look at it, internal contradictions. So, for instance, Piggy is somebody who is picked on, right? He's sort of like bullied, but he's also kind of bullying Ralph in the first chapter. He's calling out and saying, hey, you can't swim well, and he's sort of making fun of Ralph. And then, so what makes Jack a complex character? He's very antagonistic, he's very tough, but on the other hand, when it comes time to kill the first pig that he finds, Jack actually backs off and he's too scared. And we see him cry in other moments, we see him embarrassed. So it's really internal contradictions. So what makes Simon a character that's complex? To begin with, he's introduced as, we don't even learn his name, but he's introduced and he faints. That's the first moment that we see Simon. He actually faints. This is when the choir boys are walking down the beach and they first meet the other boys. They meet Ralph, they meet Piggy, and all the little uns, and Sam and Eric. So you would assume that this kid, who maybe is a bit younger than some of the other boys, he's a bit skinny, and he faints, you would assume that he'd be scared, that he would have maybe more of a meek or scared demeanor going forward. But he's actually not. When Ralph asks him to go on the expedition on the island to see actually, if it is an island or if there's anybody else on it, he does not hesitate. Simon says, okay, I will go with you. So right off the bat, very quickly, we see, oh, okay, there's more to Simon than meets the eye. Now, later down the line, later in the book, there's a very interesting moment that I do want to read to you right now. Simon was burned by the sun to a deep tan that glistened with sweat. He picked his way up the scar, past the great rock where Ralph had climbed on the first morning, then turned off to his right among the trees. He walked with an accustomed tread through the acres of fruit trees, where the least energetic could find an easy if unsatisfying meal. Flower and fruit grew together on the same tree, and everywhere was the scent of ripeness and the booming of a million bees at pasture. Here the little ones who had run after him caught up to him. They talked, cried out unintelligibly, lugged him toward the trees. Then, amid the roar of bees in the afternoon sunlight, Simon found for them the fruit they could not reach, pulled off the choicest from up in the foliage, passed them back down to the endless outstretched hands. When he had satisfied them, he paused and looked around. The little ones watched him inscrutably over double handfuls of ripe fruit. Simon turned away from them and went where the just perceptible path led him. Soon, high jungle closed in. Tall trunks bore unexpected pale flowers all the way up to the dark canopy where life went on clamorously. The air here was dark too, and the creepers dropped their ropes like the rigging of foundering ships. His feet left prints in the soft soil, and the creepers shivered throughout their lengths when he bumped them. He came at last to a place where more sunshine fell. Since they had not so far to go for light, the creepers had woven a great mat that hung at the side of an open space in the jungle. For here a patch of rock came close to the surface and would not allow more than little plants and ferns to grow. The whole space was walled with dark aromatic bushes and was a bowl of heat and light. A great tree, fallen across one corner, leaned against the trees that still stood, and a rapid climber flaunted red and yellow sprays right to the top. Simon paused. He looked over his shoulder as Jack had done at the close ways behind him, and glanced swiftly round to confirm that he was utterly alone. For a moment his movements were almost furtive. Then he bent down and wormed his way into the center of the mat. The creepers and the bushes were so close that he left his sweat on them, and they pulled together behind him. When he was secure in the middle, he was in a little cabin screened off from the open space by a few leaves. He squatted down, parted the leaves, and looked out into the clearing. Nothing moved but a pair of gaudy butterflies that danced round each other in the hot air. Holding his breath, he cocked a critical ear at the sounds of the island. Evening was advancing toward the island. The sounds of the bright, fantastic birds, the bee sounds, even the crying of the gulls that were returning to their roosts among the square rocks were fainter. The deep sea breaking miles away on the reef made an undertone less perceptible than the cessation of the blood. Simon dropped the screen of leaves back into place. The slope of the bars of honey-colored sunlight decreased. They slid up the bushes, passed over the green candle-like buds, moved up toward the canopy, and darkness thickened under the trees. With the fading of the light, the riotous colors died, and the heat and urgency cooled away. The candle buds stirred. Their green sepals drew back a little, and the white tips of the flowers rose delicately to meet the open air. Now the sunlight had lifted clear of the open space and withdrawn from the sky. Darkness poured out, submerging the waves between the trees till they were dim and strange as the bottom of the sea. The candle buds opened their wide white flowers, glimmering under the light that pricked down from the first stars. Their scent spilled out into the air and took possession of the island. So I know that's a lot to take in, but it's very significant because this sets up what happens later on in the story. This sets up a horrific moment. So for Simon has found this private location on the island. It's a private area in the jungle, and nobody else knows where it is. And this is a place where Simon goes from time to time. He even goes there at night, which actually starts to freak out some of the little kids. That's, part of the reason why they talk about a beast actually later on is because they actually are saying, hey, I heard something moving around in the forest. And it turns out it's actually Simon. Simon's crawling around and walking through the dark forest. Again, not afraid at all. But this scene in particular is a beautiful, beautiful passage. It has so much imagery, so much light, so much life and nature, and kindness too. It starts off, it's very kind. What makes it kind? Well, it's Simon, because he's older than the very little kids, he is picking the fruit from the trees and giving it to the little kids. It's almost, because Simon is supposed to be a Christ-like figure, an innocent who is, later down the line killed. This is sort of like, feeding the multitudes, so to speak. So he's doing that for these little kids. And then after that, he goes into this private place. And he's seemingly protected, he's doing good, he is one with nature, essentially, and has no fear. And that's what makes the scene, when they finally kill him later down the line, that much more horrific. Now, there's another very important line as well when the boys are talking about the beast. And they're taking a vote, they're talking about, if they think ghosts are on the island or if there really is a beast. And it's really starting to devolve. And Simon says, maybe there is a beast, only it's just us. And it's such a prolific line. And again, it carries the thematic message that Golding is trying to get across, that again, the beast is within us all. I talked about it in the previous video about why the Netflix series really sort of fails to carry that thematic message, but it's encapsulated in that line. Maybe there's a beast, maybe it's only us. So the beast is inside of them. There is no outside beast that actually can harm them. It's really just themselves and their future actions that are actually going to cause the harm. And so Simon says that, super important. And that's a major reason why he's one of the most important characters in the book. I'll tell you right now, it's because he's the character who has the truth from the start. No one listens to him in the way that they should, but he has the truth. And that's why when they actually kill him, it is that much more devastating. Okay, so now I'm gonna read another section that's later on in the book. This is from chapter 8. And this is after Jack and his hunters decapitate the pig that they found and hunted, and they actually put the pig's head on a stick that's sharpened at both ends, and they put it into the woods. And this is supposed to be like an offering for the beast. And I want to read this next section because compared to what I just read before, this is really a stark contrast. For how beautiful that one scene was, this is equally disturbing and dark and menacing. So this is when Simon discovers the pig head on a stick. And, you know, in this chapter, he's actually very dehydrated. He has a piercing headache. He's not all there. He actually feels like he's about to faint, which he does by the end of the chapter. But this is when he discovers the pig head on a stick. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head still remained like an afterimage. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business. I know that, Simon discovered that he had spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head grinning amusedly in the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilt guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast. Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. Run away, said the head silently. Go back to the others. It was a joke, really. Why should you bother? You were just wrong, that's all. A little headache, something you ate, perhaps. Go back, child, said the head silently. Simon looked up, feeling the weight of his wet hair, and gazed at the sky. Up there, for once, were clouds, great bulging towers that sprouted away over the island, gray and cream and copper-colored. The clouds were sitting on the land. They squeezed, produced moment by moment. This close, tormenting heat, even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. Simon lowered his head, carefully keeping his eyes shut, then sheltered them with his hands. There were no shadows under the trees, but everywhere a pearly stillness, so that what was real seemed elusive and without definition. The pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. After a while, these flies found Simon. Gorged, they alighted by his runnels of sweat and drank. They trickled under his nostrils and played leapfrog on his thighs. They were black and iridescent green and without number. And in front of Simon, the lord of the flies hung on his stick and grinned. At last, Simon gave up and looked back, saw the white teeth and dim eyes, the blood, and his gaze was held by that ancient, inescapable recognition. In Simon's right temple, a pulse began to beat on the brain. And so just compare that to what I read previously when Simon's in his private space. He's now again in another private space, only this time it's dark, it's demented, it's twisted, and he's no longer feeling safe. This is done on purpose. This is done on purpose by Golding to create a contrast and really show us the message that Ralph is going to learn. Because when Ralph later discovers the pig head on a stick, that's when things all come full circle for him too. When he actually starts to incorporate that darkness as a survival tool in the end game. But for Simon here, this is really an important scene, and a few pages later in the chapter, he actually starts to hallucinate that he's talking to the Lord of the Flies. And so this part is unlike any other part in the book. This is very trippy, and it's been portrayed in different ways. In the original version, it's portrayed without any dialogue. In the Netflix version, there is some dialogue. But really, it's Simon hallucinating with the Lord of the Flies, hallucinating that he's talking to the pig head on a stick. So I'm going to read this to you now. It's another part here, and then we'll get to Simon's death scene and talk about why that's important. You are a silly little boy, said the Lord of the Flies. Just an ignorant, silly little boy. Simon moved his swollen tongue, but said nothing. Don't you agree, said the Lord of the Flies. Aren't you just a silly little boy? Simon answered him in the same silent voice. Well then, said the Lord of the Flies, you'd better run off and play with the others. They think you're batty. You don't want Simon to think you're batty too, do you? You like Ralph a lot, don't you? And Piggy and Jack. Simon's head was tilted slightly up. His eyes could not break away, and the Lord of the Flies hung in space before him. What are you doing out here all alone? Aren't you afraid of me? Simon shook. There isn't anyone to help you. Only me, and I'm the beast. Simon's mouth labored, brought forth audible words. Pig's head on a stick. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, said the head. For a moment or two, the forest and all the other dimly appreciated places echoed with the parody of laughter. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go. why things are what they are?" The laughter shivered again. "Come now," said the Lord of the Flies. "Get back to the others and we'll forget the whole thing." Simon's head wobbled. His eyes were half closed, as though he were imitating the obscene thing on the stick. He knew that one of his times was coming on. The Lord of the Flies was expanding like a balloon. "This is ridiculous. You know perfectly well you'll only meet me down there, so don't try to escape." Simon's body was arched and stiff. The Lord of the Flies spoke in the voice of a schoolmaster. "This has gone quite far enough, my poor, misguided child. Do you think you know better than I do?" There was a pause. "I'm warning you. I'm going to get angry. Do you see? You're not wanted. Understand? We are going to have fun on this island. Understand? We are going to have fun on this island. So don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else." Simon found he was looking into a vast mouth. There was blackness within, a blackness that spread. "Or else," said the Lord of the Flies, "we shall do you. See? Jack and Roger and Maurice and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph. Do you see?" Simon was inside the mouth. He fell down and lost consciousness. Bizarre scene, but very important. This is the confrontation that has been building thematically. You know, anytime you have a story, the plot needs to very logically, very realistically lead to some sort of final confrontation between the protagonist and also the antagonistic force. But there also has to be a natural thematic confrontation as well. And so this is sort of like a prelude to the final confrontation, which we get with Ralph at the end, and that's what makes this book so genius, by the way. But with Simon, it is so important that he's the one who actually encounters it, because it makes his death that much more tragic. After he wakes up, because the next chapter, chapter 9, called A View to a Death, Simon wakes up and he no longer hallucinates. He no longer sees the pig head on a stick as the Lord of the Flies. He just sees it for what it is. It's just a pig head on a stick. And so now that he's awakened, he has the truth. And that is going to be, or really in a just world, the truth should be a perfect tool. That, you know, the truth should sort of be like a cure. It should help society, it should help people get better. And so not only does he find out the truth about the pig head on a stick, he also finds out the truth about the dead parachuter. You know, the beast, so to speak. So that was the beast that Sam and Eric had seen first, and then Ralph and Jack and Roger had seen, and all the boys were in mass hysteria. They think that's the beast. Because again, and I should do a video on this, but the parachuter is moving in the wind. You know, he's wearing this parachute and it's filling and expanding and deflating and inflating, and it's like a jellyfish moving. And so it looks like this dead parachuter actually is a beast. But Simon finds it. And, you know, Simon realizes that this is actually just a dead guy. And you know what he does? Simon actually releases the parachuter from the rocks that he's caught on. The reason why this parachuter is stuck there is because his parachute is stuck on the rocks. Simon goes up to it and releases the string. And so now, in a way, the beast is free. The beast. But he doesn't quite leave the island yet. The parachuter stays where he is. Leaving the island comes later. But later on in this chapter, A View to a Death, is when they actually kill Simon. The circle of the boys, we talked about it in the previous video, but in their frenzy, they think Simon is the beast and they crunch around him and they wind up killing him. And right after they kill Simon, Golding writes this very genius paragraph here about how the parachuter releases from the island, you know, so the wind actually blows his body right off the island. So what's so tragic about this and what's so scary is that you had this, not only an innocent character who gets mauled to death, you know, bit, torn at, gnashing of teeth and claws, but also he's the character who has the truth, and now they killed him. And not only that, the parachuter's body is leaving the island, so he's gone. So there's no chance that they're going to find out the truth. That's why Ralph has to resort to savagery in order to survive by the end of the book, because they've completely abandoned the truth. They've completely abandoned any sort of rational thinking. Let's see, I want to read this other part here. This is really the last part with Simon. It's kind of like the way I teach it is it's sort of like a funeral scene for Simon. And so I'm going to read it because he's dead at this point, but the way that the nature is described around him and his the way his body is described, Golding really honors this character, and so this is significant. Toward midnight, the rain ceased and the clouds drifted away, so that the sky was scattered once more with the incredible lamps of stars. Then the breeze died too, and there was no noise save the drip and trickle of water that ran out of clefts and spilled down, leaf by leaf, to the brown earth of the island. The air was cool, moist, and clear, and presently even the sound of the water was still. The beast lay huddled on the pale beach, and the stains spread inch by inch. The edge of the lagoon became a streak of phosphorescence, and that advanced minutely as the great wave of the tide flowed. The clear water mirrored the clear sky and the angular bright constellations. The line of phosphorescence bulged about the sand grains and little pebbles. It held them each in a dimple of tension that suddenly accepted them with an inaudible syllable and moved on. Along the shoreward edge of the shallows, the advancing clearness was full of strange, moonbeam-bodied creatures with fiery eyes. Here and there, a larger pebble clung to its own air and was covered with a coat of pearls. The tide swelled in over the rain-pitted sand and smoothed everything with a layer of silver. Now it touched the first of the stains that seeped from the broken body, and the creatures made a moving patch of light as they gathered at the edge. The water rose farther and dressed Simon's coarse hair with brightness. The line of his cheeks silvered, and the turn of his shoulder became sculptured marble. The strange attendant creatures, with their fiery eyes and trailing vapors, busied themselves round his head. The body lifted a fraction of an inch from the sand, and a bubble of air escaped from the mouth with a wet plop. Then it turned gently in the water. Somewhere over the darkened curve of the world, the sun and moon were pulling, and the film of water on the Earth planet was held, bulging slightly on one side while the solid core turned. The great wave of the tide moved farther along the island, and the water lifted. Softly, surrounded by a fringe of inquisitive bright creatures, itself a silver shape beneath the steadfast constellations, Simon's dead body moved out toward the open sea. So a very beautiful passage to honor Simon. Golding sort of turns him into a statue here by comparing the turn of his shoulder to sculptured marble, and also just highlighting his silhouette, highlighting his hair and his face with bioluminescence. It is just fascinating. But it's important, it comes full circle. We have that very innocent scene with him when he's feeding the young ones and he finds that private place in the woods. Then we have horrible scene with the pig's head on a stick, the Lord of the Flies, and then getting killed. And then finally, there's rest now. There's finally peace for Simon. So for a pure soul, for someone who is completely innocent in this horrible world, really the only rest for him is now going to be in death, unfortunately, because there's no place for him on this island. And so he's so important, this character, Simon, because you couldn't get this theme across with any of the other characters. All of the other characters are morally impure. We've talked about why Ralph is. Ralph participates in the killing of Simon. Ralph actually is not nice to Piggy when he first meets him. And then, Piggy, he has his flaws too. He justifies the murder of Simon after it's done. And even before that, he falls short of what he promises. He makes mistakes. And then obviously Jack too. And so really, the only morally pure character here is Simon. And that's why this theme that there's darkness inside everyone's heart has to be carried by him, because he shows the contrast. Simon is the contrast. That's the point. That's why Golding has those contrasting scenes. You've got the scenes of light and you have the scenes of dark. Well, Simon is the light character and the rest are the dark. So in order for you to understand the darkness, you have to understand the light. And Simon is the one who actually represents light in this novel. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you'd like to support the channel, I actually created these 2 composition notebooks. They are based on Lord of the Flies. They are on Amazon. I will link them below in the description. And this one is sort of based on the boys as savages, based on chapter 4, painted hair and long faces. Or, I'm sorry, painted faces and long hair. And this obviously is the pig head on a stick. The back isn't, so crazy, but the front is really cool. So if you want to support the channel or you just want a cool composition notebook, you can click the link below. Have a great day.